Today marks 22 years since terrorist attacks killed people in our nation and changed our world forever. Many are still living with the effects of what happened on that September day. Joining me this morning is Courtney Clark. She has spent half of her life dealing with World Trade Center related cancers. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate your time. For people not familiar with what World Trade Center cancers are, talk to us about that.
I wasn't familiar with it at first. So I was first diagnosed with cancer at age 26, 4 years after September 11th. I didn't equate it at the time that I had been down there. I just started my first job right out of college. And so 4 years later, I was diagnosed with stage 1B to 2A invasive malignant melanoma. It's typically a skin cancer. And I didn't think it could be related at all. 2 years later, again, and I've gotten it now 4 times.
Since?
Yes, 4 cancers. But we recently learned that it all traces back to my exposure on September 11th. 30,000 of us have been diagnosed with World Trade Center related cancer.
Wow. Well, take us back to that September 11th day, where you were, what you were doing.
Just started my first job. I graduated from NYU in New York City in May.
You're a proud Texan.
I am a proud Texan.
School brought you to the city.
Yes. Yeah, I went to New York for school and then I stayed to work. And that morning I showed up at work and nobody was in the office, which was really strange. I was never the first.
Were you
one
in Lower Manhattan?
Yes.
The office was in Lower
Yeah,
Manhattan.
we were in Soho.
Oh, yeah.
Probably about 17-ish blocks north of the World Trade Center. And nobody was in my office. I thought that was so strange. But then after several minutes, one of my colleagues came in and said, we're all across the hall. They were in somebody else's office that had a television. They were watching on TV, and the reports coming out at that time were that it was a propeller jet.
Yes.
Yes, a little small plane.
Not intentional.
Correct.
Yeah,
that something accidental must have happened. But that office, the woman who owned it, was stopped on 6th Avenue, and she was talking to her colleague who was with us in their office saying, no, the plane flew over my head. I saw it. It was an American Airlines jetliner. So
cold chills.
We actually had a sense before most of the rest of the country
watching.
But I wasn't the eyewitness, but this woman in the office across the hall said, "This is what I saw."
Being in Soho, when those towers fell, did you hear and feel that impact from up north?
So we were standing out on the street. My colleagues and I were standing out on the street, and it almost looked like it was there, and then it just sort of wasn't.
Dropped.
And this plume of smoke rose up. It almost looked like a magic trick.
Yeah.
And that's when people started heading our direction. Everyone started heading north, and then we started to realize, as an hour had gone by, wait, this is happening at the Pentagon? Another plane went down, and so they closed the office, and we started evacuating, and the long trek, everybody had to walk.
Yeah.
There were no buses, subways.
And
running.
I remember the phones too. Being from New York and my grandparents lived in the city, my uncle worked in the tower. We couldn't get a hold of them I think it was late that night, like 11 p.m. My mother was able to get a hold of her father or somehow. But I mean, it was days before we were actually able to have a conversation.
That's right. Really early that morning, when it was still being reported that it was a propeller plane, I had called my mom and stepdad back in Illinois because my stepdad is a structural engineer.
Oh, wow.
And I asked him, I said, it was an American Airlines. He said, no, I'm watching the news. It was a propeller. I said, I really don't think that it was. Could that still be in the building?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, no, that's not good.
Yeah.
I don't think so. But then that was the last I could. They knew I was safe then, but that was the last I could talk to them for hours. But my dad and stepmom luckily lived in the city, and so I made it to them.
What has the journey been like since? Your first bout with cancer, you said, was a few years after. That journey since, the support you've received, the fear that comes with it, though?
It's very hard to have cancer as a young adult.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of support when you get cancer older. That's when you're, I hate to say supposed to get cancer, but that's when we're used to people having cancer. And as a 26-year-old, you know, you have your own health insurance, hopefully, but it's hard to date.
Yeah.
Think about starting a family. You know, because of the cancer, I shouldn't have a baby.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea for me to get pregnant. It's like all of these things that you expect out of life are suddenly
along that time,
taken away.
You can't do. Yeah. You've since written 3 books.
Yes.
People, what's your message to people watching and wanting to connect? What would you say to them?
I think what's really important, I research, write, and speak to organizations about resilience. And I think what's really important about resilience is it's not about powering through, always being tough, always being happy. It's actually about being willing to change your plans so that you can still reach your goals in a different way. I couldn't have a baby. We adopted a teenager. And that is the person that was supposed to be my son. So there's often a different way around every problem. And I think we talk a lot about, you know, grit and perseverance. Those things are helpful until they're not. So I argue that sometimes people should actually be willing to give up a little bit more often, because when you do that, you find a different way to achieve what it is you're going for.
A little flexibility in life.
Exactly.
Or a lot of flexibility.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
However you want to look at
adapt,
it. Yeah,
how
absolutely.
are we going to be able to change when we need to? Everything changes these days.
Great perspective. We so much appreciate you coming in this morning. We'll be sure to put all of this information inside this story on our website.
Thanks, Zach.
So people can go about connecting with you.
I
Thank you,
appreciate
Courtney.
it.
I appreciate your time.